playing until the streetlights came on, going to Blockbuster on Fridays, and going to Pizza Hut to get stuffed crust pizza to go home and watch your favorite movie with your family, collecting Pokemon cards, only having 3 or 4 channels to watch throughout the day, watching what your grandparents watched, and not having on-demand services. Those were the days. Some of you may feel that way too, but what happens when nostalgia goes a little too far? Welcome into Overt Conversations. It's your boy Dan Davis II. I pray that this message blesses you. You know, as a teacher, I teach the next generation of leaders of this world. There's a lot of pressure in that. Technology has sped up a whole lot and things are not what they used to be. But what happens when we dwell on our childhood? What happens when we dwell on the good old days more so than we live in the present? We end up missing what God is doing in our life now and what he's going to do. There are 2 reasons why people tend to dwell on the past more than they actually live in the present. The first being that their future is uncertain. Their present is uncertain. They don't know exactly where they're going. And then the second being that they may be in a valley. They may be in a dark place right now, and they need to dwell on the past to help them get through. Nothing wrong with the second. But when we dwell too much on the past, we miss out on the growth that God is trying to do in our lives. Ecclesiastes 7:10 says, "Do not say, 'Why were the old days better than these?' For it is not wise to ask these questions." You may be asking, why is it not wise to ask these questions? Now, I don't know where you guys stand eschatologically, but where I stand is that this world is going to continue to degenerate until Jesus comes back. When we dwell too much on the past, that is where our heart is. Think about Lot's wife. If you haven't read Genesis chapter 19, this is where Lot is told by an angel to leave the debaucherous cities of Sodom and Gomorrah that he was living in. The angels told them to leave, him and his family, and that they would destroy the whole city. But if they looked back, then they would be destroyed as well. As Lot gathered his family and the sulfur and the fire came down and destroyed the city, they left. But one of his family members looked back, that being his wife, who turned into a pillar of salt. When our hearts are in the past, we destroy our present. We look at everything through the lens of what was. And if your past was traumatic, then you destroy what God has blessed you with in the present. Numbers 14:1-4. That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died in Egypt or in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to a land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to each other, "We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt." The Israelites who have traversed the wilderness are afraid because they are about to go into battle to occupy the promised land. But instead of that, they dwell on the past and say, hey, we could eat as much as we want here. We could do X, Y, and Z here. We had freedom here. Meanwhile, they were actually in bondage. Whenever we begin to dwell on the past and actually try to transport ourselves back to the past, we need to think about 2 things. Number 1, we are a new creation. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old is gone and the new is here. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. He has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, Be reconciled to God. God made him who had no sins to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. When we begin to dwell on the past, we need to realize that we are actually ambassadors of Christ. We are appealing on God's behalf, not only to those that are around us, but to the world at large. That word reconcile is a constant. It says that God was reconciling the world to himself. That means that he is doing it now, even now. While you are thinking about back in the day when gas was 89 cents, or back in the day when you didn't have cell phones and you had to use a payphone, or back in the day when you didn't have social media, you need to be thinking about, hey, I am a new creation. I am an ambassador of Christ. He is reconciling me and the world. We've already come to the conclusion that we are a new creation in Christ and the old has passed away. But now we need to think about the future. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it. But one thing I do, forgetting what was behind and straining towards what is ahead, I press on towards the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. You know, a lot of times when we have our business plans or we create our speeches and all those things, we're asked, what is our why? As Christians, our why should be to look more like Christ. Our why should be to win the prize for which God has called us heavenward in Christ Jesus. One of my favorite movies is Napoleon Dynamite. And if you know anything about Napoleon Dynamite, he's an odd character. But he had an uncle who all he could talk about was high school football and how they won the championship and all of those things. He carried a football with him. He carried a football with him everywhere he went. What did that do? That stunted his growth. That made him blind to what he was actually living in presently and where he could go in the future. Don't allow the past to hijack your present. And don't allow the past to make you weary of your future. I pray that this message blessed you. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Much love. Godspeed. Until the next one. Peace.